The ultimate deal. That's how US President Donald Trump has coined the achievement of Israeli-Palestinian peace. The landscape since he took office, though, has dramatically shifted, with a 10-year rift between the two Palestinian factions drawing to a close. Now, in the most recent development, the Islamist group Hamas handed over control of Gaza's border crossings to the Palestinian Authority ruled by Fatah. Hamas, which rules the Gaza Strip, openly calls for the destruction of the State of Israel and is refusing to disarm its military wing. Now, this prompting Israel to snub the possibility of peace talks. So where does this leave Trump's big plans? Let's take a look at the picture up until now.
And I think we're going to make a deal. It might be a bigger and better deal than people in this room even understand. That's a possibility. So let's see what we do. Doesn't sound too optimistic, but that's... Hamas and Hezbollah launch rockets into Israeli communities where school children have to be trained to hear the sirens and to run to the bomb shelters. Not with Donald J. Trump.
About not a national unity government, but a national terror government. And it's clear that Israel cannot and will not negotiate or have any sort of dealings with such a government. Would Americans be willing to deal with any government that had bin Laden as one of their parties? That's exactly what we're facing today.
The process of national reconciliation, national unity started, and no force could stop it.
And joining me now from the United States, Middle East and geopolitical analyst RJ Brodsky. Matthew, thank you for being with us. Now, we know that Trump kicked off his presidency with something no other US president has done, with a trip to the Middle East. What Trump effect has there been on the peace process, if any, since that visit?
Well, I mean, first, he seemed a little bit like coming up to the buffet table at the first time with a large appetite, wanting to accomplish a whole lot in the Middle East, and then realizing you can't really shove everything onto the plate. It was always going to be a long shot getting Palestinian-Israeli peace. However, we should really look at where we were a year ago. This was when we had the Obama administration basically go to the United Nations and pass a resolution, or at least they were behind a resolution that they could abstain from that was anti-Israel. At the same time, the State Department is still pushing in a different direction right now than the Obama and the White House itself is. So that's a problem. So there's a lot of work to be done in the peace process, but I don't hold out a lot of hope for much in the way of a slam dunk deal.
All right, Matthew, stay with us. We're going to talk to you after the break. But first, perhaps the Trump effect hasn't done much for Israelis and Palestinians hoping to reconcile. But as the bromance between Bibi and Trump continues, it seems they've found a common enemy on which their similar campaign is having an effect. Trump's fake news rhetoric is becoming an increasingly used tactic by Netanyahu, and statistics appear to show the world leaders are coming up trumps.
They say nothing can bring people closer than a mutual enemy. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu would probably agree, and no, we aren't talking about Iran, North Korea, or ISIS.
The leftist media.
Fake news media or press. Fake.
There's an industry of gloom here.
I'm against the people that make up stories and make up sources.
The media is recruited to a Bolshevik witch hunt. Brainwash.
That was fake news.
Fake news.
You are fake news.
But is the fight against the media merely a political tool to garner support, or is it getting personal? For the Trumps and Netanyahus, it's a matter of shared destiny. Both Trump and Netanyahu established a worldview deeming the problem is not in reality, but in the way it is being perceived. It's not the message, but how it is being conveyed. They see traffic jams, said Netanyahu in an unforgettable speech. I see intersections. While no one is sugarcoating the aims of the fight, the most important question is who's winning. According to comprehensive polls in the U.S. and in Israel, 2016 signaled a striking victory for the anti-media campaign. In the States, it was an all-time low of public trust in the media, and in Israel, a constant, perhaps unstoppable drop. Netanyahu can already check one notable achievement. His counter-campaign succeeded in turning the fight for his own position into a greater fight for the sake of the right-wing rule as a whole. It's us versus them.
There will be nothing because there is nothing.
More on the Trump effect in the Middle East right after this short break. Stay here. Welcome back. Well, the Trump effect on the Middle East seems to be having a far greater impact outside of the ultimate deal. Let's have a quick look at the United States' fight against Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. It's been over 3 years since the war against the jihadist group was announced. The US-backed forces led an offensive that has changed realities on the ground. It's altered the trajectory of the civil war in Syria, and it's shifted the balance of power in Iraq. In February 2017, the Pentagon said it has spent almost $12 billion on the anti-ISIS operation. This year in Iraq, we saw US-backed forces recapture the IS stronghold of Mosul. And in Syria, an incredibly complex landscape that has seen the first direct strike on Syria by the US military. Take a look. 2017 has been a good year in the fight against Islamic State. Let's start with the Syrian government. In March, a string of major victories against Islamic State jihadists began. The Syrian army, backed by the Russian Air Force, recaptured the ancient city of Palmyra. And in September, broke the Islamic State siege of Deir ez-Zor province in Syria's east. For US-backed fighters, the biggest victory in the battle so far. In mid-October, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces capturing the IS stronghold of Raqqa. Also this year, an anomaly in the usual narrative, with the first direct confrontation between the US military and the government of Bashar al-Assad. In April, the United States lashing out at Syria, firing a barrage of cruise missiles at a military base from where the US believed a deadly sarin gas attack in Idlib originated. A UN report later found that Assad forces were responsible for the attack that killed almost 90 people. So with the Islamic State presence in the region significantly diminished, questions are emerging over who's going to fill the vacuum left by the group. And the answer seems to be most likely Iran. Now, Iran's influence is stretching from Syria, where it's been helping the Syrian president in the war against Islamic State, to Lebanon, where the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah has a growing political influence. In Iraq, Iran's been helping the central government to crush Kurdish hopes for independence. And in Yemen, Iranian-backed rebels have been fighting against the internationally recognised government. So is President Trump following through on his promise to curb Iranian influence in the region? Still with me, Middle East and geopolitical analyst Matthew Brodsky. Matthew, what's your take? What's Trump's scorecard here?
Well, okay, when it comes to making a move against the nuclear deal, which is a horrible deal that puts Iran on a glide path toward having a nuclear weapon, he's done a good job. To renegotiate it, that's going to be a challenge, but we'll see how that goes. When it comes to sanctions, so far he has taken an activist approach to that. Whether he'll go further or not on the Revolutionary Guards, we'll see, but that would be positive. But when it comes to pushing back regionally against them, and I'm saying on the ground in Syria, in Iraq, or just politically when it comes to Lebanon or Yemen, the scorecard is not so well. A lot of these gains are just going to be transferred over to Iran, and that's a real problem, and that's a problem today. That's not a problem in 5 years. That's not a problem about sunset clauses. That has to do with real people, and that has to do with what's happening right now. So he has a long way to go, I would think, to change the direction he's going in, and that would certainly reinforce all of his messaging and his negotiating hand when it comes to the nuclear issue.
Right, and what about when it comes to the fight against Islamic State? You know, after this most recent terror attack in the United States, he vowed more bombing and more attacks on ISIS on their home turf. How is he faring there?
Well, okay, so he's done, instead of concentrating on Iran or dividing his time, he's certainly made a lot of progress pushing back militarily on ISIS. But there isn't a bomb them to smithereens or bomb them out of existence type of plan that's actually going to work. There's going to be an ISIS 2.0 that comes forward after. They're currently moving into the Anbar province, or that's where they're gathering. But this is going to continue. I don't think he can actually bomb his way out of it, but it's at a area where it's more manageable. I think he would do better to really consider what America's objectives are and interests are a little bit, I guess, to redefine them a bit more, because to just keep chasing around a whack-a-mole game with ISIS, you know, there's going to be a law of diminishing returns soon.
Right, and Matthew, Iran is blaming Saudi Arabia as well as the United States for being behind Saturday's resignation of the Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri. What's your take there? Do you think that the United States had something to do with that?
I don't think the United States had a lot to do with it. I think Hariri's resignation had a lot more to do with Saudi Arabia than it did with Iran or whatever he claims about an assassination attempt. However, granted, there was a meeting between Kushner and the prince in Saudi Arabia. But the fact is, if the United States had this as a large plan, then when Hariri resigned from Lebanon, then the United States wouldn't have had the Pentagon say that they're going to still keep giving money over to the Lebanese armed forces. That contradicts the entire message if it were to be one message. Hariri's resignation basically removes the veneer that there is some form of democracy or independent institutions in a Lebanese government. It's run by Hezbollah, and Hariri knew that before he joined up last year, that is. And
just briefly, your perspective on whether Trump is better leveraging Saudi Arabia under his administration than perhaps Obama's administration. We're seeing them as real players now.
I think he is, and I think that Saudi Arabia is definitely taking a look at what they're hearing from discussions, and then they're being adventurous in their own policy. Their plan and what they've been doing to crack down on corruption, or at least that's what they call it. The greatest threat to the United States with that is that it fails. If it succeeds, it would really move the kingdom forward. It's not a path to democracy, but it's a path forward that would really set Saudi Arabia up nicely and do a lot to push back on radical Islamic movements.
Right, well, it's a complex landscape. Thank you so much for laying it all out for us, Matthew Brodsky. All right, well, Trump's election might elate or rankle, depending on your politics, but one thing is for sure, the man has absolutely dominated the media landscape and pop culture as well. Award ceremonies to modern art, President Trump is determined to live rent-free inside a lot of celebrities' heads. I-24 News reporter Ariel Levin-Waldman describes how one man now owns US culture.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
One full year since the presidential election that shattered expectations. 1 year and very few significant policy changes. No wall, no immigration ban, no changes on Obamacare, and certainly no chance of lock her up. But while Washington and the rest of the real world continue as normal, there's at least one sphere of public discourse utterly, irrevocably changed by the electoral storm. Yes, pop culture. Whether it's Shia LaBeouf threatening to chant, "He will not divide us," into a camera for 4 years straight, or a cascade of celebrity tweets. On every topic, Hollywood and the rest of America's cultural institutions have become utterly dominated by a war on Donald J. Trump. Sometimes it's civil.
We are the diverse America who are alarmed and anxious that your new administration will not protect us, our planet, our children, our parents, or defend us and uphold our inalienable rights.
As in the case of the Hamilton cast. And oftentimes it's less so. With Kathy Griffin famously ending her tenure with CNN with a picture of herself holding a fake severed Trump head and covered in blood. One thing's for certain, it's impossible to find respite from politics and entertainment. From Hollywood, the Academy Awards, to Broadway rap and the NFL, it seems there's nowhere celebrities aren't filling the airwaves with political opinions. And if there's one thing that Trump has accomplished, it's making at least some of their ratings great again. Ariel Levin Waldman, I-24 News.
Final curtain.
Coming up, is the US vision of a Middle East peace deal about to be rolled out, and what could it look like? We look at what's fallen under the radar in the Middle East with Mohammed Al-Qasem right after this.